What's up, everybody? Welcome to CheezeTalk podcast. I'm your host, Brian Rago. I'm joined with my guest today, Dave, aka The Sproles on Twitter. Today we're going to be talking about Packers and life. But before I get to my guest, I'm going to give a shout out to the Ope Network for giving me the chance and opportunity to podcast under their umbrella. There is a giveaway, an 8x10 signed Jair Alexander picture. Once they hit 420 or 523 followers, I believe they are 90 followers away, as Ohana_Packers. So, Dave, tell me about yourself.
Hey, Brian, glad to be on the podcast. I follow you and have followed you on Twitter for a while. And just in the last couple of weeks, I watched your guests, Emily, who's a buddy of mine, and Fitz. So I hope I can live up to their high standards, their lofty standards. So the reason I reached out to you is I think I have kind of a strange story. I live right now in Northeast Wisconsin. I live in Appleton. And but I am a recent transplant. I say recent. It's been about 22 years, so I guess it's not that recent. But I was a Packer fan. I've really been a Packer fan for the last 50 years, and I grew up and spent the first part of my adult life in on the East Coast in a community called Wilmington, Delaware. And
Yep.
By the way, for you, a quick quiz. And I've asked this to a lot of the people that I've connected with out here in Wisconsin. So Delaware is surrounded by 3 states, touched by 3 states. What are the 3 states that are contiguous to Delaware?
Maryland?
That's one.
Rhode Island?
Nope. One more guess.
I don't know. I'm trying to picture.
Yeah, I know. Well, here's the interesting thing. So the answer is Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Maryland.
Okay.
Now you are with like everybody else because nobody else gets that one right. However, when I go back to Delaware, because we still have family there, I'll ask them, well, what are the 4 states that touch Wisconsin? And nobody gets that one right either. Yeah. So anyway, so I grew up in Delaware, and the community I was in was about an hour south of Philadelphia and an hour north of Baltimore. Okay. So all of our media came from those 2 places, right? So you'd see back then, by the way, it was the Colts and the Eagles, and the Eagles sucked, and nobody that I knew was fans of the Eagles. But how would a kid 1,000 miles away from Green Bay become a huge Packer fan? Well, when I was just about the age where, as a kid, you all of a sudden discover sports and you discover the professional sports. And right about that moment, my aunt gave me a copy of the book Instant Replay, written by Hall of Fame guard Jerry Kramer. And I got to tell you, Brian, I read that book probably 100 times, not just cover to cover, but it was a diary of the 1967 season, which was the 3rd NFL championship. At the time, it was, that was something that nobody had ever done before. 3 straight NFL championships. And I used to read that book all the time at night before I get ready to go to bed. I'd open it up and read a couple of days entries by Jerry Kramer and all that kind of stuff. So consequently, I ended up being the only kid on the playground wearing a Packer jacket. Everybody else was wearing Steelers and Raiders and Cowboys and Vikings and all these other teams that were good back in the 70s, right? So for 20 straight years, I ended up being like the pariah because the Packers were terrible from about 1970 until Holmgren and Favre came in the 90s. And there I was, rooting for the Packers and had my cheese head, and all that kind of stuff. And so as kind of this bizarre thing. Well, life is kind of funny sometimes, right?
Sure.
A mentor of mine calls it karma. And I got in 2002, a corporate reorganization. I got offered a position in Wisconsin. And so I call up my boss, and it's like, well, Wisconsin's a pretty big state, and I was covering the entire territory. In fact, I had responsibility for the UP and Northern Illinois as well. I said, well, where do you want me? And I'm thinking he might say Madison or Milwaukee or something. He said, no, my office is in Green Bay. I want you right in Green Bay. So then I dialed back and I called to the office administrator, and I said, I happen to know that your office is located on Lombardi Avenue. And I know the stadium's located, Lambeau Field's located on Lombardi Avenue, but I didn't know it could be 5 miles long. I didn't know where, says, how close is the office to the stadium? And she pauses for a minute. She says, well, from the other side of the building, you look right out on it. So I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. My first day in the new job, I'm driving up, and boom, right there is Lambeau Field. I'm like, this is like heaven, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, Lombardi, I mean, for people that don't know, it ain't that big of a stretch.
No. And like I said, from the East Coast, I had no clue. I thought it could have been a 5-mile road, or as it turns out, you're right. It's not that long. And in fact, that office building is still there. I no longer work out of that office. I still work at the same company, but I don't work out of that office. But that's where I would park. And it's the closest place where you actually don't have to pay. I probably shouldn't be saying this over live air, I guess. I don't know, but I'd kind of sneak in and park there. And, when I was working there, I had a business card that proved that it was my work address, and just walk right over to the stadium. So it's that close. It's pretty cool. So that I realized, that old story, you're not in Kansas anymore, Toto, right? I realized that I wasn't on the East Coast, because one of the first, so I moved out in the very end of March in 2002. And, like 2 months later was May, and they were doing OTAs. And at the time, they did OTAs right there on, I want to say it's Clark Hinkle Field, which is right between the Hudson Center and Oneida, right? And it was right there, right? I mean, there's a chain link fence. And I'm driving back from a business appointment, and all of a sudden I look over and they're practicing. So I pull right into the lot there, and I go across the street and I play hooky for an hour, and I sit there watching practice. I'm from me to the wall, between, with Brett Favre, right? And he's out there throwing passes, and people are talking to him. And I'm like, I'm died and gone to heaven. So I get back in the car and drive, 2 more minutes back to work. And as soon as I walk in the door, one of the guys says, "Hey, how was Packer practice, Dave?" And I realized, I'm in a small town now. Everybody knows everything, right? I was busted very early in my career.
Yeah, that's a great story. My wife is from De Pere, and I'm from just south of Madison.
Okay.
And we were working Badger games at the Regent Street Retreat, which is a bar down from, it was called the Retreat, down from Camp Randall.
Okay.
And we had a mutual friend that was the manager, and my wife worked the beer garden, and I was a bouncer, and I had no idea who she was. And then we got introduced, and things, obviously 18 years later, here we are. But I was, I'm a huge Packer fan, and when I found out she lived up in Green Bay, I'm like, oh, can we go to minicamp? Can we go? I'm like a little kid in a candy store, like the same with you. I died and I went to heaven. Here I am sitting there on the side in the bleachers, and she's running the Best Buy, get me memory card to my digital camera, and I'm sitting there watching practice, and there's Aaron Rodgers, and that's when they had like Vince Young and as a backup, and Charles Woods and AJ Hawk, just the nine, and it was pretty cool, just be able to be there and feel like you're part of practice,
Yeah.
So it's a very, very cool story.
Well, in fact, back in the 80s and 90s, we didn't even get the Packer games on TV back on the East Coast. They play at the same time as the Eagles, and because they're both I guess Eastern side teams, and they're always playing at the noon time slot. Well, if it was Fox or whatever, you were getting the Eagles game. And you wouldn't get the Packer game. And so, you might get, like, if they played Monday night, fine. And this is before Thursday nights, right? So you might see one Monday night game a year, and then you might see one oddball, Sunday afternoon or, late afternoon slot game or something like that. So I would actually, there was a place called Damon's. I don't know if they had them out here, but Damon's was like a sports bar, and they would have like 8 screens up on the, big screens up on the wall, kind of like B Dubs, kind of like that. But these were like really big screens. And I would go over and make friends with the manager, and I would tell him, look, I said, look, can you just give me one? You got 8 screens. Just give me one of them on the pack game. I don't care which one it is. Just give me one.
Right.
And sometimes you'd be able to do that. And that's how I'd have to do it to watch games. So even when I got out here, and normally I'll make it to one game a year. But we get to see everyone, every one of the games. And it's like, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And so again, that's where I thought I died and got into heaven, just because I could watch every one of the games and I didn't have to go to some sports bar and bribe the bartender with
Right.
the game on.
I was going to mention, you brought up that book, Instant Replay, about Jerry Kramer. I was actually at St. Vincent de Paul on the north end of Green Bay. Was it Thursday? And with my wife, and I actually bought that book. It was there. It was I don't know, like 99 cents or something like that. I have yet to start reading it, but, I got a Reggie White book, The Minister of Defense. I got a book about Lombardi, book about, Brett Favre. And I even got a book called, when I was younger, called The Boys Will Be Boys, about the Dallas Cowboys. And some of the behind-the-scene things that happened with the Cowboys, pretty crazy stuff happened with Michael Irvin. Imagine that. Speaking of the Packers, what are your thoughts on this year's draft?
Really good question. Well, first of all, you've got to say, in Goot we trust, right? Because I think he's earned the right with the selections that he's made over the years, and last year kind of proved that. I mean, this year, a year ago this time, we didn't know what Jordan Love was going to be. He didn't really have much playing time, and you just didn't know. And you also didn't know about guys like Jalen Reed and Wicks and guys like that. But if we look at this year's draft, I would say I have 3 comments about it. Number one, you can tell that they're prioritizing protecting the franchise because they picked 3 offensive linemen. And I read this somewhere. I can't remember who wrote this story, but it basically said Goot's philosophy is on a lot of the key areas that he needs to really reinforce, that he's not going to just take one dart throw. He's going to try to stack the deck and get multiple guys. And I think you see that in this draft, where the number 1 pick was, Jordan Morgan, a tackle out of Arizona. But you also have Jacob Monk, an offensive lineman from Duke, and Travis Glover, another tackle. So they got 3 guys. And you figure, they lost Bakhtiari, they lost Yash Nyman, they lost Runyon, so they definitely need to reinforce that area. And so I think it's great that they picked those guys. And by the way, safety tip, I know one of the questions you're going to ask is my favorite pick. And I don't, like I said, I'm not sure who my favorite pick is right now, but what I think is a sleeper for a guy that 3 years from now we're going to look back on is that Jacob Monk from Duke. And simply, he had 58 starts. He was a 2-time captain. To me, it's like that's a Zach Tom. That's a TJ Lang. That's a Josh Sitton. We know one of these mid-round guys that most people don't know. It's not a household name. But I think they've probably done the research. They know that this guy is a player, and he's just going to come in and do his job. So that's one. Number one. Number 2 is they obviously needed to reinforce the defensive backfield. So they got 4 defensive backs, including Javon Bullard, a safety out of Georgia, who I think is probably going to be a day 1 starter. Next to Xavier McKinney. But then they also got, they got 2 other safeties. So again, that just goes back to the point about Goot saying, sometimes it's better to have quantity, and you put these guys into practice and you put them in mini camps, and College guys, there's not always a direct translation from college to the pros, and some of them figure it out faster, and some of them it maybe takes a little while to figure that out. So I think that's where getting multiple guys is a big help. And then finally, I think the last two guys they got in the seventh round, picks 245 and 255, could be home runs. You got this
Yeah.
quarterback from Tulane that I got to be honest, I never heard of before, but all he did was win games, and he had some huge plays. And I like what Goot said even before the draft is we got to get back to drafting quarterbacks because, and that's what their thing has been: draft and develop guys. And you probably remember guys like Mark Brunell and Hasselback.
Hasselback and Aaron
Yeah,
Brooks. And,
Aaron Brooks, guys like
yep.
that. And they were, they got these guys and they developed them for a while. And then, they trade them. Or if, even today with free agency, the way they get the compensatory picks. I mean, a guy after 4 years, he goes and he signs a big deal and with another team as a quarterback, and then we get back like a third or fourth rounder so I love that strategy. I love that idea. And then the last guy they picked, Kalen King, was a guy they thought in his junior year might have been one of the top cornerbacks in the country. And he had a terrible senior year and not a really good combine. So you don't know, but he walks in with a chip on his shoulder, and obviously he's upset at where he was picked and all that. And we've seen how that works for guys in the past, and so I think that could be that's one of those sneaky picks to watch in training camp. It could be an interesting story.
Yeah, I like Javon Bullard along with bringing in Xavier McKinney at safety. I think Javon Bullard's gonna just add to that swag. He's gonna make the defense play better. You pair him with Jair Alexander too. They're just gonna go crazy this year. I think the defense is gonna make leaps and bounds changes compared to what we were last year, and that's gonna be good to see. What do you think were the strengths and weaknesses last year for our team, for the Packers?
Well, to answer the question on defense, I think you have to go back and this is not to be an apologist to Joe Barry, but it's sometimes only in hindsight do you kind of understand what's going on. I believe when they hired him, I believe LaFleur said, this is my thinking, right? But I think he looked at that and he said, our defense doesn't have to be a shutdown group. If we can force a team to go 80 yards in little bites and it takes them 8, 10, 12 plays, sooner or later there's going to be a penalty, maybe a turnover, or maybe we stop them on downs, right? Maybe something happens. And so, that's the scheme he had. And for me, it was so frustrating because it was like a slow death, they were just like getting 5, 8, 10 yards at a crack and just going all the way down the field. And it was frustrating. And I think with the new guy, I think it's been a complete change. And that being said, we don't know what the results of the new system are going to be, but I think you're going to see potentially more big plays against us. But I think you're also going to see more aggressiveness and more opportunities to make plays, turnover, sacks, and create problems for the offense. So that'll be interesting. On offense, I think what you saw, it was pretty clear. And if you go again, hindsight's 2020, right? But you go back and look, and you had a brand new quarterback who had only a handful of meaningful snaps before that. You had almost a brand new receiving core, and two brand new tight ends, a couple of brand new wide receivers. Even the veteran wide receivers were second-year guys, and then Watson was down for most of the year. Bakhtiari plays the first game, and then he's out, and they're bringing in a new left tackle. And Aaron Jones was out for a big chunk of the first part of the season. So, it took them a while to figure out how to work together and how to develop that chemistry that I think you need with offenses. And the good news is, except for Bakhtiari, and except for Aaron Jones, the rest of those guys are back.
Yep.
So, hopefully they'll be able to build on that chemistry. And, they always talk about the second year, the leap that players make in the second year. And so you're hoping that some of those guys, the Musgraves, the Crafts, the Wickses, the Reeds, that, they're going to be able to enjoy that second year jump. So I think that's where, we can be cautiously optimistic about, the trajectory that we're on as a team.
Sure. Our weaknesses last year for me, I think our run game or our defensive run game, like we couldn't stop a nosebleed last year up the middle.
Right.
And I think another weakness was our strength and conditioning program. I mean, you have guys that had the same injuries. They're hamstring. I think getting rid of what we had and getting people from the 49ers organization in is going to be huge for us. And then they sent Christian Watson and Jair down to UW-Madison to get checked out by people down there. So, they mean business when they go to UW-Madison. They're one of the best in the world for everything,
Right.
So I was actually just there yesterday. So, but
by the way, another funny story about UW-Madison. I'm the black sheep of the family. I'm the only one of the last 4 generations not to go to UW-Madison. So my grandfather was born in Algoma, and he was the first of, I don't know, it's like 14 or 15 kids. He was the only one of 14 or 15 kids to go to college. He graduated from UW-Madison. He then moved to Delaware, and that's where he lived all of his life. My dad was born in Delaware, but during the Second World War, Dad enrolled in the Navy, and they did an assessment thing, and they said, well, we need engineers, and you've got the capability to be an engineer. Our school is Madison. So his service for World War II, they sent him to Madison to get his engineering degree. So, and I always say that he was the biggest Wisconsin Badger fan and alum in the entire state. And Delaware's not a big state, but he was the biggest fan of Wisconsin. In fact, the house I grew up in, if you walk down the hall, they had pictures of Carillon Tower, the Abe Lincoln statue, and Bascom Hall. Right, those are the three big pieces of art, in the hallway, right? And that's what I grew up on, So then when I came out here, my daughter was 5, but I was telling her at 5, you're going to go to Madison, and she did. She graduated from Madison about 5 years ago. So.
Okay. Yeah,
so I'm the black sheep. I'm the only one that did not go to Madison. I went to the University of Delaware.
Right. I didn't go to school down there, but I did party down there. And I probably helped pay for some kids' college big time by giving them tips, and yeah. So that's in the past, but it was definitely a blur. I'll put it that way. It was a blur living down there. It was like days ran into each other. In between, your days, you had to go work. Then you're getting out of work and you're going right back down there again to party, and yeah. Back to the pack.
Yeah, they have earned their reputation as one of the top party schools. My dad never liked to hear that. When those stats would come out, he wanted to believe that it was a good academic institution, which it is.
Right.
But yeah, they have earned their stripes in terms of the party school.
Well, a lot of the people that go to school there that are athletes. I saw an article that had Tyler Wall on the cover about how academically, like, the Wisconsin students are some of the top in the nation. So,
right.
I mean, they don't just go there to one and done. They go there to play sports and get an education. Exactly. So that's cool.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the free agency, McKinney and Jacobs?
The whole running back thing was a shock, wasn't it? I mean, if you'd said we were going to go after Josh Jacobs in free agency, I'd been like, what are you talking about? But, again, in Goot we trust. I mean, I think what they did there was they got a guy that is a little bit different kind of runner from Jones, and definitely has the capability of being a real bell cow. Has had, a very good career so far. So I'm looking forward to what he can do. It's sad to see Jones go. It's terrible to see him put on purple. Um, but I think they looked at it and said, best case scenario, maybe he gives us one more year, and that's if he stays healthy, and that's become a
Yeah.
big if. So, from that stand, but McKinney was clearly, in fact, I follow Andy Herman, so I guess a rival podcast. But I follow Andy Herman and listen to him all the time, and in the before free agency even started, he did a thing of like, what would be our ideal, and McKinney was the guy he had. And so I think the fact of McKinney, and not just him as a player, but what he brings as a leader, and because he was a captain, so and Jacobs was a captain too. So you got two guys that are leaders on their respective teams coming in, which is huge, especially for a young team like the Packers. And secondly, he fits perfectly with the scheme because he's used to playing in that kind of a defense. And they really needed somebody that's going to be a great communicator. That's going to be, you mentioned Bullard. You got to have a guy that has already done it before that can kind of teach them on the field how to do it and where to line up and what to do. So, yeah, I think those were two huge moves that we really needed to do. And, you go back and think about guys that Packers have brought in free agency over the years, whether it be a Charles Woodson or a Julius Peppers or, even go back to Reggie White. I think they look for guys that are not just a good player, but a guy that's going to be a good leader. And I definitely feel that about both those guys, and I'm excited to see what they can do on the field.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you go back and talk about Reggie White. They brought in a big name free agency in him. They won a title. They brought in Woodson. They won a title. Hopefully with McKinney and Jacobs, they can do the same thing. McKinney's only 24 years old. Then look at that. Look at his resume already. He has, as a safety, he has 9 interceptions. He has 1 pick six. I mean, he's a go-getter. He's young, he's versatile, he's athletic. And then we get Javon Bullard, and those two attitudes that mesh together are gonna just create a strong defense, I think, for our team. And I'm super excited to watch the defense play this year, big time.
Yeah. And, again, that goes back to what Goody's done sometimes in the past is you get a free agent, like when they got Rashawn Gary. That year was the year that they also got Zadarius Smith, right? And Preston Smith.
Yep.
So I think getting that veteran guy and getting the rookie and putting them together so that the rookie can learn from the veteran, I think that's really a great strategy. And so that's exactly what they did at safety. We've needed, our defense has kind of been the donut defense, right? We have the big hole in the middle. So what do? They have Quay Walker, and now they have Edrin Cooper at linebacker, so they got 2 guys in there, high draft picks to hopefully help fill that hole in the middle. Like you said, hopefully stuff the run. And then at safety, they've got McKinney and Bullard. So, that's clearly where I think they're looking at trying to fix what they needed to fix.
Right. And I think going to the 4-3 defense, I think that's going to be huge too. I think on the outside, there should be some plays installed on defense where you have Rashawn Gary going back to how he was in college on all 4. Just to get leverage and have Cooper right next to him. It is.
Well, actually, that's another hidden thing in the draft. And again, I give credit to Andy and his podcast and the guests he has. But especially if you look at some of the guys they picked a little bit later on in the draft, whether it be that linebacker from Missouri, Hopper, Evan Williams, Oladapo, the safety from Oregon State. These are all guys who and also Cooper, right? So all those guys really have a lot of experience and a lot of success blitzing. So, and again, I can't get in the head of the, Hafley's head and whatever, but I don't think that's an accident. I think they look at that and said, yeah, the key to success today is the same as it was, 40 years ago. There was a guy named Al Davis who was the managing general partner of the Raiders. And his famous saying was, in the first quarter, the quarterbacks must go down and he must go down hard. I try to
Yep.
say that in Al's accent, but I'd probably fail. But anyway, I think that's, you look at it today and you look at the quarterbacks in the NFC North. You know, we don't know what we have in Minnesota. In Chicago, they got a rookie. In Detroit, they have Goff, but Goff is no Lamar Jackson. He's no Mahomes. I mean, I think the secret is you got to get after these guys. You got to make them aware that you're there. You got to hit them.
Yeah.
And the league has taken steps to protect the quarterback and to keep you from hitting them late and all this kind of stuff. But you still, I mean, at the end of the day, to play good defense, you got to make that quarterback uncomfortable. You got to make a move. You got to make them, worried. And so I think a lot of those guys that they picked, regardless of where you line them up at linebacker, you line them up at safety. But I look at that. That's kind of one of the things that I'm hoping to see. I'm hoping that's what Halfley has in mind on the defense to try to get more pressure on the quarterback.
Yeah, get pressure on the quarterback. The quicker you get to him, the less we have our defensive backfield chasing around receivers. You can't chase them around for 5, 6, 7, 8 seconds. Someone's gonna win, and it won't be the defense.
Yep.
So I think the quicker you get to them, the quicker turnovers happen. I also do like the draft of Marshawn Lloyd out of UIC. I think he's going to be our second running back, number 2. And I think they drafted him because he kind of mimics Josh Jacobs' style. And I don't know if they're going to have Josh Jacobs around for those 4 years. So get him action along with Jacobs, and then if Jacobs gets too expensive, well, you have the next in line, So that's kind of how I'm thinking on that.
One other interesting tidbit on Lloyd is that he's not a small guy. I think he's about 220, but he's short, and short backs are harder for the defense to find. They hide behind the offensive lineman, and but the other thing that Lloyd has that Jones didn't have was the speed. Lloyd is a 4.4 guy. I mean, he's what does it say? If you're even, you're leaving. I mean, he's the guy that you're not going to be able to track down. There were a couple of times in big games over the last couple of years where Aaron Jones had a huge run, but he got caught from behind. And that in that Niner game last year, he had a huge run, but he got caught from behind. And Lloyd won't get caught from behind. So I look at that and I think that's another missing element of our offense is the ability to be able to score. From make a big play, make a long run, and so I agree with you. I think Lloyd's going to be an exciting guy to watch.
I saw a video too. I was looking up stats on Jacobs, and he had no receiving touchdowns as a running back. Then I saw the short video clip. I think I shared it on Twitter of Lloyd catching the ball, and he just immediately turns around and he's gone. So I think get him familiar with the offense, get him some reps, get him in on those passing downs. You're going to pass to the running back, and kind of go back and forth with him and Jacobs. So I'm excited to see how they utilize the both of them. Yeah. And then when teams get sick of those two, then they're going to bring in AJ Dillon just to pound you down. So that's going to be fun to watch.
Yep, I agree with you. Yep.
Favre or Rodgers?
Oh, that's a tough one. I don't know. I mean, you have to give Brett Favre a lot of credit because before he came, that was the dark ages, right? And he turned that whole thing around. So I think you got to give him some credit for that. I think one of the reasons Reggie came was he wanted to play with Favre.
Right.
Reggie played for the Eagles and they played the Packers, and the Eagles back then were a really dominant defense, and they were hitting him left and right, and Favre just bounced up every time, and and just kept throwing. And I think Reggie really respected that, and so time has kind of dimmed both those guys. They both have had some off the field stuff and some questionable decisions. So let's just leave it at that. But I also read a column recently that Rodgers kind of redefined the way the quarterback position is played.
Yeah.
And and so I think we've been blessed by having two absolute lock, Hall of Fame guys. It's I can't pick. I mean, it's
Yeah.
they're but we owe them both a lot. We have two Lombardis sitting there at the at 1265 in the Hall of Fame, and one for each of them. And a lot of
Yeah.
people say, well, they only got one. You know what? That's one more than Minnesota has. That's one more than Detroit has, for their for the entire history of the Super Bowl, right? So, I don't. I mean, yes, it would have been nice to win more, but at the same time, you got to be thankful for what you have, and I'm thankful for both those guys and the contributions that they made.
Yeah.
One other thing that was interesting, which is I think both of them had a very conscious understanding of what it means to be a quarterback in Green Bay. And I think back to the night when Favre was retired or some kind of thing, and they had Aaron was playing, and Favre was there, and Bart started. That was Bart's last, I think, appearance in Green Bay, and his health was failing. But just the fact that the three of them understood that they were the lineage, of quarterback excellence in Green Bay, and I thought that's another thing that we want to be thankful for, that we have that kind of a community, that we have that kind of a team, that we have that kind of an organization. Not every place can say that,
Right.
So
Yeah, that's a very good answer. I mean, you look at Favre, the gunslinger. He also at one point was the leader in touchdowns, but he's also the leader in interceptions. And then you go to Aaron Rodgers, who is kind of the opposite as far as the interceptions. He didn't want to throw them,
right,
so he has one of the best TD to interception ratios, which is good.
exactly.
I love them both. Just kind of wish things didn't end the way they did, but all good things got to come to an end. And I've said in the past that I think the last few years, Rodgers is trying to, make his voice be known a little bit more. And I think that people are walking on eggshells around him, wanting to do the right thing to make him happy, or else it's going to be hell for him. I'm not going to throw you the ball, so thankful for both of them. Thankful for the lineage we had at quarterback and the history we have developing quarterbacks. A lot of teams would kill to have that,
Exactly.
So that's something we can always say. I think I know the answer to the question. What favorite coach in team history? Lombardi?
When you sent me that, I didn't know what to say. I mean, part of me wants to say Lombardi for a variety of reasons. But I just want to give you two. Actually, I'll give you three examples where I think coaching has really stepped up in Green Bay. One was Holmgren, obviously turning around, the franchise after 22 decades of ineptitude. And what I thought was really interesting was at the end when, it wasn't really the end, but when he finally raised the Lombardi after so many tries at trying to get there. He had a great comment about Lombardi's finally coming home where it belongs. And he said something like, means more to us because it's named after our coach. And, it belongs, we won the first two and it belongs in Green Bay. So I thought that was kind of neat. The second thing is a guy that doesn't get, recognized a lot, had a fairly short tenure, was Mike Sherman. But Mike Sherman was the coach and actually the GM at the time when they remodeled Lambeau Field, and he did a really interesting thing because they changed the what we call it, runway or tunnel from where the players run onto the field from the north to the south end of the field. So, but what he did is he took out a square of concrete from the original tunnel. And that's still there now in the new tunnel where you and I can both walk across it. And he did that to say to his players that you're always going to walk over a part of, the ground or this concrete or whatever that the iconic teams of the 60s did. So I thought that was kind of neat. And then finally, the story about McCarthy, in 2010, when the players came into their meeting room, they had all the pictures of all the championship teams lined up, and right in front was a blank. And the blank was to say, that's where your photo is going to be. And sure enough, that's what happened. And I thought that was kind of a neat story. So I think we've been blessed. I mean, obviously McCarthy's, he kind of outlived his tenure, and Holmgren same, and that kind of stuff. But I think we've been blessed by having some really, really good coaches over the years, and I hope LaFleur can, step up to the plate and demonstrate the same qualities of leadership that the other guys did to get us over the hump.
Yeah, I like all the ones you brought up. I mean, they've all been a part of our history in Green Bay. So it's one of my favorite though out of those that you mentioned is LaFleur. I've had a chance to talk with him, meet him. Super nice guy, super nice family. I'm glad he's able to actually run the offense that he wants to run. I think
Right.
Go back to my last question, and I think Rodgers was making some changes in the huddle that favored him more than anything. So I'll leave it at that. You've been to games at Lambeau, correct? I assume. What was your most memorable game that you've been to in person?
Well, we're going to answer that two ways. The first was the very first game for obvious reasons. I've been a fan for 30 years before I set foot in Lambeau, and that was the year of the reconstruction. The whole stadium was torn up. It was really kind of a mess. But I vividly remember walking in there, and I wanted to literally go down on my knees and kiss the concrete, because I've heard so much about it and read so many stories, and it's just whatever. So it was a big moment for me. But kind of the backstory, I mentioned that a park across, kind of across the street. One of the guys that I kind of worked with was driving to the game, and he said, "Why don't you hop in?" And I liked the guy, and he was kind of a client, if you will, and I didn't want to offend him, so I said sure. It would have been better for me to walk because trying to drive, he was driving over to one of the houses near the stadium where he'd pay $25 or whatever and park on the grass, but it would have been faster for me to walk. So the long story, the end of the story was that I got in like a minute before kickoff. And it's a December game. It's against the Bears, and I get up to my seat, and there's no seat. There's no seat. You're right. Let's say I'm seat 12, right? And I'm going. There's no space. I mean, people are just jammed in, whatever. So I'm walking down, okay, who's got 11? Who's got 11? Who's got 11? Finally, I found the guy that had 11, and the guy that had 13 was sitting, like right next to each other. So they parted about 3 inches between them, right? And so I sat down, and the whole first half, my shoulders were like this because I couldn't even get my shoulders in, right? So I'm like and so that was my first experience, right? And then there was a lady in front of me in a big Packer parka. It's cold; it's probably 10 degrees out, and she's got this big Packer parka on, and she's standing up at all the wrong times. Like right after we'd have a mistake, like a fumble or something like that, she's standing up. And when we score, she's not standing up. And I'm like, what's going on with this? So finally, after 4 or 5 of these things, I tap her on the shoulder and I said, what's going on? And she turns around. When she turns around, she had this big, hood up all over. She had this little I don't know, head warmer or whatever with the Chicago. She was a Chicago Bears fan. I said, what are you doing? She says, I'm wearing this parka so you don't get yelled at. That was like one of those weird things. So then the other example was the game against, it was playoff game against the Giants in 2016, I think it was. And that was one of the single best plays I've ever seen, was Clay Matthews. And Clay Matthews, we were leading. It was kind of early in the fourth quarter. We were leading by a couple of scores, but the Giants were driving. They were up around midfield. And Matthews comes around and sacks Eli, but it's not just that. He sacks him and he knocks the ball out. He's kind of behind Eli, and he knocks the ball out of Eli's hands, and he knocks it out with such force that it flies forward about 20 yards. and his ball's skidding around on the ground. And of the 22 players, 21 of them had no clue what was going on. The ball's just laying there. But Clay keeps going, and he keeps running after the ball. And one of the Giants, like receivers or whatever, leans over and just like leaning over to pick up the ball, right? And Clay just completely comes up behind him, decleats him. I mean, just sends him flying and falls on the ball, curls up, and just protects it like that. And the refs are like looking at each other. They don't know what the heck's going on, you know. And finally, they signal it's Packer ball. But I thought that was one of the most incredible plays ever because, you know, it's not just a sack, it's not just a strip, it's not just a recovery, but 21 of the Packer guys, I think Peppers was on the field and he didn't know what was going on, you know, but Clay's the only one that knew what was going on, and he jumps on the ball, and it ended up sealing the game for us. And that was it, you know, that, by the way, that was the game that OBJ put his fist through the wall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wasn't that the game that Cobb had that touchdown in the back of the end zone, like perfectly?
It was a Hail Mary right before the end of the half. I mean, they had one play, and it was the thing of beauty, you know. And like you said, yeah, I mean that was the other big play from that game that I remember, is that that was the only time I've really ever seen a successful Hail Mary live, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I think that ball in Detroit's still up in the air. That Rodgers threw.
I think Richard Rodgers is still huffing and puffing to get down there.
When you hear Green Bay, what comes to mind?
The frozen tundra.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I think about. I mean, I think we're lucky in that, we just have a real storied history. And you know, it's the other thing that I think is amazing about it is that, you know,
look at what's going on. Quick?
Yeah.
Sorry. Hey.
The dogs are playing in the water, so they're wet.
Okay.
I don't know, they offered to blow dry them, but I just figured just get them home. But
yeah.
Have them out in the backyard running around to dry off.
Okay.
Because I'm definitely going to have to light down the car.
All right.
Okay.
All right. All right. Love you.
Yeah. Bye.
Okay, I'm back. Sorry.
What I was going to mention is that I think, you know, look at what's going on in Chicago, where they don't know where they're going to put the stadium, and the team's fighting with the city, and, you know, and all this kind of stuff. And, or what's going on with some of these other franchises that move, that we won't have to worry about that. Right. I mean,
yeah,
the team is the city is the team. They're linked. And I think that's incredibly powerful. And you know, that's because what the one negative about the NFL, at least from my perspective, is I think you have a bunch of owners that are kind of wackos. I mean, you know, whether it be Dan Snyder, that, you know, I mean, obviously he's out now in Washington, or the people in Cleveland, I think are you know, that guy's not a good guy. And you have, you know, and that's the thing. We don't have to worry about that in Green Bay. We don't have to worry about some owner doing dumb stuff, you know, embarrassing the team, embarrassing the city, and stuff like that. So I think that's, you know, real plus.
Right. Favorite Packer. I mean, I know you have one that stands above the rest.
Yeah, again, that's so hard to say. If you go back to all time, I mean, part of me wants to say Jerry Kramer, because he's the reason I'm a fan. You know, he wrote that book, and that's what inspired me as a kid. You know, part of me wants to say that Reggie White, or, you know, or whatever. So I think there's a lot of them that are, you know. I will tell you this. I probably will never ever again get a jersey. I think my first jersey was KGB. Remember that guy? And KGB was
No.
a neat guy, right? You know, he was a neat guy, but he didn't have a real long career with us. And then my wife got me AJ Hawk jersey when he was drafted. And again, AJ Hawk, I mean, you know, whatever. It's so hard to tell. And some of the people that went out there, like the guy that I really wanted after his first year was Za'Darius Smith. But then after what happened with him at the end, I'm like, oh, I'm really glad I didn't get a Za'Darius Smith, you know. So I love my guys. As long as they wear in the green and gold, they're my guys. But I'm not sure I'm going to be in the jersey business.
Yeah, I have Charles Woodson and Reggie White jerseys.
Yeah, and those are two. You know, like I said, if you'd asked me if I gave you one more answer, it might have been Woodson because he was just such an incredible player for us. So
yeah, he was. Do you think Love throws for 40+ touchdowns this year?
I don't know. You know, part of me thinks that I'd say 50% of that is dependent upon health. You know, can he stay healthy and can they protect him well? And the other part of that answer is dependent upon the running game. You know, like you said, if they got Lloyd and Jacobs running and they get 15 touchdowns between the two of them, which is very doable, you know, those are touchdowns that won't be coming through the air. So, you know, I don't, it's a marker. It'd be nice to have, but at the end of the day, you know, it's like, let's have success as a team and not worry about the individual stats.
Right. Good answer. You're straightforward with all your answers, and I love it. It's good answers. You're not swaying one way or the other. You're just like a team player all through and through.
I mean, I think that's how you have to win. You know, you can't be too dependent upon any one guy. And even though Jordan Love is the franchise, you know, but I'd be more comfortable like depending upon him to do what he does best and move the team and let the playmakers make the plays, you know. So.
Sure. You knew this question was coming. Favorite type of cheese?
I think I told you at any one time there's probably 8 or 9 different varieties of cheese in my fridge. I love a good sharp cheddar. Especially like a sharp white cheddar. I always have that. I'm always, freshly shredding it for whatever I'm making. Obviously, I've got Mott's. I've got Monterey Jack. I would have to, and this is probably not a good thing for Wisconsin dairy farmers, but the cheese that I probably revere the most. And I know that your earlier guest, Emily, knows this, is Parmigiano Reggiano, which obviously is not made in Wisconsin. It's made in Italy, but it's a very expensive cheese. I've got a friend going to Italy in a couple of months, and I told her, I said, bring me back some Parmigiano Reggiano, but I also told her, I said, you may not be able to afford it because it's really expensive stuff. But it's that, if you ask me my absolute favorite, that would be it. I don't put it in like recipes, but I'll use it over top of stuff. Like if you make pasta, I won't put it in the sauce, but I'll put it over top, that kind of thing. So, yeah.
I'm going ghost pepper.
I heard you say that. Yeah. And now I live not too far away from Simon's Cheese in Little Chute.
Yep. And
so I go there pretty frequently to get stuff. They've got a really good selection and all that. I'll have to look for that next time.
If you ever go, you know Scray's cheese in De Pere?
I don't.
They're just out in the country. They're right. I mean, you can watch them making their cheese and everything. Yeah. It's like a mile from my house. And
okay. I have to tell you, I used to go up to De Pere on a regular basis, and I'm no longer doing that. And the reason is that Uncle Mike's, I don't know if you know Uncle Mike's. I think you probably do.
They're in Appleton, yeah.
They're in Appleton now. So
I've been to that one, yeah.
I'm on a first name basis with the staff there.
Yeah. No, so like if you're in De Pere and if you're taking the back roads back, like on Highway 57 south.
Yeah.
It's one of those roads, Old Martin Road. You take a left on it, and then it takes you right to Scray's Cheese. So
I got you.
So yeah, that's kind of back where I live, and They actually gave me a decal to put on my car to. So, yeah, but hey, they have a friendly employees, and they're super nice, and they have good selection of cheese. So it's a good place to go.
As by the way, as a public service announcement to the rest of your audience, to the the CheezeTalk podcast network, if you're ever anywhere in Northeast Wisconsin, check out Uncle Mike's Bakery.
Yes.
They make the most awesome stuff, including the best Kringles, the world famous Kringles, at the gym that I work out at. And you can tell I'm not Hulk Hogan or somebody like that. But at the gym I work out, I'm known as Dr. Kringle. So like you said, yeah, like you said, like I'm on a first day basis with the staff there, but they make great products, and there's probably
they have their fresh made cookies, they have donuts, they have Kringles, they have cake, they have pie, they have fresh baked bread, they have everything. And these actually, even if you're just hungry and you can't afford a Kringle, just walk in there and start eating off their sample tray.
That's right. Yeah. The other day they had their NYT cookies, which stand for not your
New York.
Typical.
They're not your typical.
It stands for not your typical.
Yeah.
But it's like a chocolate chunk cookie, and they had those in sample. And I said to the lady, they had like a whole tray of them. I said, "You're trying to get me in trouble, aren't you? I'm just coming from the gym, and you got all this free cookies out there, like." So yeah.
Yeah, no, right. There's one in Green Bay on the east side, over off of Mason. There's one in De Pere by De Pere High School.
Yep.
There's one in Howard on Lineville,
something like that.
And then there's the Emporium down on Wisconsin. So yeah, they're definitely my go-to for bakery. You get your go-to, your niches and stuff like that, and that's Scray's Cheese and Uncle Mike's. I always support local, so that's why I do it.
There you go.
If you were to go to a tailgate at Lambeau, what are you bringing with you?
Well, you know what? Your earlier guest Emily may have stolen my thunder. I don't remember how she answered that, but she has a phenomenal meatball recipe. And I'd make those meatballs, because you can do anything with them. You can put them on a sandwich. You can eat them just, in the sauce. And I just saw this recipe that I haven't tried yet, but it's basically where you take kind of like the dinner roll and you hollow it out, and you kind of make garlic bread with it. So you put some garlic butter and kind of bake that just long enough until it kind of gets a little crispy. You stick a meatball down in there with the sauce and cover it with cheese, and then bake it again till the cheese melts. That's what I'd bring.
That sounds amazing.
You got all your major food groups. You got your bread, your cheese, your meat, your sauce. I mean, you got it all, right? That's what I'd do.
Yeah. That sounds really...
Then a Kringle to wash it down with.
Yeah. Kringle and some Wisconsin milk.
There you go, right?
No, actually, a couple of weeks ago, I went field trip with my first grader. We went to Collins Dairy Farm, which is Greenleaf, and just the operation and just how we do things there is crazy. Like a big carousel that 60 cows go on. It just spit like for milking. So every 7 hours they go up on it. Wow. And every 7 hours a cow produces 86 gallons of milk.
Oh my goodness.
Or is it 86 pounds?
Wow.
I think it's 86 pounds. Anyway, it's a lot. And so they got to go every 7 hours, and they had 1,400 cattle there. And it's just, they had like a 32,000 gallon or 36,000 gallon, like temperature controlled silo to put all the milk in for the milk truck to back up to empty it out. This is a huge operation. They had all female cows there because they're just doing the milking for cheese in Wisconsin. So pretty cool to go there. If you guys ever get a chance to go to a dairy farm and you want to know how stuff is done, it's very, very, I've been alive 42 years and I love my dairy products, and just the more you find out and the more you know, it's just crazy that you need to support farmers because they make the world go around big time.
I was going to say, God bless our farmers, because, they're out there in all kinds of weather, whether it's 10 below or 90 degrees, like it's going to be tomorrow or whatever. And they're out there, doing what they need to do so that we can go into a festival and buy the cheese.
Yeah. Or Scrays.
Yeah, thank you. Right.
Or Simons. Are you an owner? Are you a part owner of the Packers?
I am. Yes. The first time that I became aware that they were issuing stock was right after Super Bowl 31. And my daughter was born about like 3 weeks after Super Bowl, and so she was an infant, and they were issuing stock, and I'm like, I could set aside money for her college fund, or I could buy stock, and I'm kind of getting the evil eye from my wife, so I didn't, and I regretted it ever since then. And when I moved to Appleton in 2002, they had the house that I bought. When I did the walkthrough, they had the certificate right up there on the wall. I said, I'm buying this house if you include that certificate. Well, they wouldn't, but I still ended up buying the house. But it was shortly thereafter that they had another offering. So it was then that I guess I've been an owner for about 20 years.
Yeah.
So my name is on the season ticket list, but right, I'm thinking about shifting it to my daughter because I'm still like 60 some thousand on the list, and I think a couple hundred come off every year. So I'm probably never going to get season tickets, but my name's on the list.
Yeah. All righty. Final question. I know you got something big to talk about on your end, correct?
Oh, yeah.
I was going to say, who do you think
I'd almost forgot about that.
Is Green Bay's biggest rival?
I may answer this differently from some. It seems like every offseason the Bears fans are chirping like crazy, and it's really annoying. And I'm sure you get some of that too, but my claim on it, and I guess the way I feel, is our biggest rivals are those idiots out west. That you drive across 29, and it seems like and by the way, I love Aaron Jones.
The Vikings.
Yes, the Vikings. I love Aaron Jones, and I understand that what he did was a business decision. But I am so sick and tired of our guys driving 29 West to get over there. Whatever. I just like I mean, Greg Jennings and Favre, and oh my God, it's just
Longwell.
Yeah, exactly. Benedict Longwell, and so I always think there was a book written maybe 20 years ago, before the whole Favre thing, called Cold Wars, and it talked about the rivalry. And I guess ever since I read that book, I've believed, so I always believe that the biggest game of the season is when we're over there in that stupid stadium.
The Bird Killer.
The Bird Killer, yes. So to me, they're public enemy number one. The Bears are kind of like that little brother that you beat up on, right? It's like, I don't think it's a rivalry if we won 10 straight against them, and you go back and even longer time, go back the last 20, 30 years, and we've won 80% of the games. So I don't think they think it's a number one rivalry. They think we're the number one rivalry. They're the little brother. It's the Vikings to me that's and by the way, they may be down this year. I don't know, new quarterback and all that kind of stuff. We'll have to see what happens with that, but I still worry about them. They're the ones that I think I've always felt they're the number one, the evil empire.
Right. All righty. Well, I'm going to let you take the floor here and kind of talk about.
Thanks. I just want to give a quick shout out. My partner and I, who is, we're both on Twitter, are introducing our own podcast, and it is not a competitor to yours. So it's not talking about the Packers and life. It's only a music podcast, but the title of the podcast is It's the Groove. And the reason for that is that there's a longer phrase, but when you're doing a podcast, you can't have a whole paragraph to announce it. The longer version is it's not the beat, it's the groove. And what we mean by that is we've identified over the years and working together that there's a lot of music out there that people are not aware of, or they're not aware of some of the connections within the music. In other words, not just the artists themselves, but the composers and the backing musicians and that kind of stuff. And so it's our intent and our mission to kind of shine the light on some of those people that are maybe less popular or less familiar to the audience. And so we're going to be, you'll be able to find It's the Groove Pod is the Twitter handle. And then the podcast itself is It's the Groove. And we also have a website, itsthegroove.com. So if you're interested in music, specifically music from like the 80s, my partner's Twitter handle is 80s Music Muse. I always try to stump her, and I can never stump her. No matter what I come up with, she knows the answer. So together, we're really excited to be able to bring some content to the people that enjoy popular music, and that's what we're doing. Starting on June 14th will be our first drop. So stay
Perfect.
tuned.
I'll make sure I give shout outs almost every day to get you some followers and some people to
Appreciate that.
keep you guys going.
Awesome.
I have been known to do that in the past, so
good for you. What goes around comes around, right? So yeah.
Right. Well, Dave, thank you for everything, and thank you for joining me today.
Awesome, Brian. Go Pack Go.
Go Pack Go, and I'll let you know when I get this uploaded to YouTube.
Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.